It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Oh yes, Mzazi, welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. I am absolutely loving today because it's all about our mental health. Now, this morning and next up, we are looking through the lens of sport and championing more than the game. Oh yes.
So we brought in the big guns. Today, we are joined by esteemed sports psychologist, Dr Denise Bouah, to uncover the vital role of mental well-being in sports. And I feel like this is a two-way dynamic. Now, from athletes' challenges to strategies for success, we are going to explore the minds behind the victories. And she also happens to be an incredibly good chess player, which makes me even more excited. I don't know why, I just love that, but it shows mental game. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for being this force within sport, especially when it comes to our little ones. As you can see, we are quite enthused about this space, so thank you for being
I'm more
here.
enthused because for me, sport is so symbolic of life. And I really think that these are lessons that you can take beyond just the sports field. So let's get straight into it. Obviously, we're dealing with a lot of mental challenges, and especially on the sports field where things are highlighted. How do we deal with this? What sort of strategies can be employed in this to kind of deal with this environment that allows us to maintain that sort of focus, maintain that sort of actioning that we intended to do? Is there something that we can assist here?
We want to hack.
First of all, just good morning also to everybody. And I think, sport has become so competitive. Even if you look at school level, grade 1, they don't just do sport just for the fun of it anymore. It's competitive. And we need to equip our youngsters and our adult athletes to deal with all the stress and anxiety that comes with pressure to perform. So, I was listening now this morning, it's about relaxation, and it's important to be able to cope. So we need to invest in our athletes to develop them mentally.
I'm glad you said the word invest, because I can't help but think of like the tip of the spear. We mentioned someone like a Naomi Osaka or something like that, but to the big brands, like the big sports brands, it's worth a lot of money if their top earning athlete steps out for 6 months, just to make it practical to that degree. So it does really matter in the professional side. But when it comes to that arc or that development, we're going to face stressful situations. It's a part of life, and we are wired to be able to deal with that. Sport, though, heightens those. How do we know when we are going too far, or we are in danger of maybe the burnout? Maybe we are pushing our kids a little too hard, they're pushing themselves too hard. What are the signs that that stress within sport is no longer fun and healthy, but starting to do damage?
Yeah, I think, you will go through your tough patches in sport as well. So now you also have to be vigilant in terms of when is it really just I'm going through a slump and I need to push through, and when is it a bit too much at the moment. So I think, if you look at your athlete, if there's loss of sleep, the athlete is isolating himself a little bit more from the team, moodiness, irritation, decreased sport performance as well. You're not enthusiastic about the sport
Enjoyment,
anymore. And you start asking yourself, why am I still doing this? There needs to be meaning in your sport participation as well.
This is something that is so real and pertinent right now. I've spoken to some of my friends. I've been in that example where you get to a point where all these constant pressures that you've been going through for all these years, they have to add up. Something's going to give. And often your body's holding on for dear life, going through all these injuries and all these obstacles. How do you cope? How do you maintain resilience in this environment, especially when it's consistently going up against you? Because that is sport, essentially. It's consistently dealing with challenges to allow you to rise up to the top. How do you maintain that all the way throughout to that point at the end of the line? Like, how do we maintain a resilient mind to get through this inevitable chaos?
It's a tough one because athletes move from one competition to the next. And sometimes you use one competition as a precursor for another one, so you keep pushing, pushing. And you want to perform well in everything that you participate in if you're a serious athlete. So it becomes hard if you start taking knocks and things are not going your way. And, a resilient athlete can keep going. They've got the mental toughness to say, but I'm going to push through. But we need to help with coping strategies. So athletes need to learn to focus on things that they can control, because sometimes your mind starts racing and you start worrying about all the other things, and then you don't focus on what is in your...
The next job, or that's in control.
The next step, the next thing that you have to do, because we become worried, and then anxiety sets in. And I see that in my practice, predominantly anxiety nowadays is the main the main thing.
It's dominance. I'm really interested, and I'm going to put this to both of you, and we're going to think about it for a second. We're going to continue this discussion. But for me, so much of your self-worth has got to be channeled through your performances, because that's how you're measured. That's literally how you are measured. So when that is not going well, how do you still know that you're potentially the world athlete when you're not winning?
And find value in yourself in that moment.
You can think about those. We are talking about mental stress, anxiety as it manifests within sports, and how you can push back and find a balance, because some of the greatest lessons in life are learnt in the sporting framework. How do you tap into that? We'll continue our discussion with the doc after this.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we dive right back into what has been the most enriching chat with a sports psychologist and our good friend of the show, Denise Bouah. And this time we are diving into the mental aspect of taking a break and transitioning beyond sports. And this speaks to, for me, Doc, a notion of self-worth. And maybe we can use the book to kind of as a vehicle to do this, because I would find it very difficult, and I did when I was competing, fighting, not to be my personal, kind of my own personal self-worth being connected to my performances. And maybe both of you can weigh in this sense, because how do you separate the two? If you fail, yet you are worthy of being a world champion, yet you're not going to win all the time. So how do you separate those two in a young mind when laying that foundation for a journey through sports and life? How do you separate the disappointment of loss and the person, who they are, that sense of self-worth?
Yeah, I think athletes, being an athlete becomes your identity.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so difficult to sometimes move on and transition to another aspect of your life, because you leave that behind. And we focus on the things that we leave behind instead of focusing on what we're moving towards.
Exactly.
And, and for a child, we need to teach them that when you enter sport, there will be at some point you are going to transition. It's a natural, either you're going to stay in sport and become a coach or whatever, or you are moving on into a different career field, because you will probably take a break you can take a break due to mental aspects, like we saw with Simone Biles, with Naomi Osaka, and that will probably be a few months. It can be a few years. Like Simone Biles took a 2-year gap now just to work on mental aspects. But then there will also be a permanent transition away from sport. And that we can preempt with children already and teach them to deal with setbacks, and also to teach them, when do we move on from what we are busy with and what we've invested ourselves in so much. And is it okay to move on and do other things as well? And it is.
It is. Well, I mean, most of us will change our jobs about 5 times in our lives anyway. So you're going to constantly be transitioning. We are transitional beings, so we need that skill,
It seems a little bit easier said than done, though, because I get the fact that as an athlete, you've found your identity within this thing, right? Now, is it almost a case of transitioning, meaning that you have to let go of this to move forward? Or can you take some of that with you? Because, I mean, there's certain skills that you would have definitely have learned in sport that you want to take with you into another world, but where do you go? And how do you find direction to do that? I mean, there's some people that have done that so well. I look at some of the athletes that we have in our own country. Brian O'Ban is a great example of that, someone that has executed that transition very well. I was someone that was also identifying myself only as like an athlete and figuring out, what am I going to do after this? I don't know how it got me here on the show. I mean, that's another conversation. But, I mean, you don't always have a real idea, because when is that moment going to happen and where do we go from here? So how do we lean into that direction of what to do next? How do we figure that part out?
I think, for some people it can become an existential crisis.
Yeah.
Because I've spent 20, 25 years of my life doing this and investing everything in that, and now this road has come to an end.
The meaning,
And what now? What am I supposed to do with my life? And I think, you've got to do some pre-retirement planning. It's good to, if you have a mentor, to speak, to talk things through as well. And because all the skills in sport they're transferable.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And you need to figure out, what can I transfer that into? Be it into leadership, communication, fields of where you can communicate well, where you can teach other people leadership skills and things like that. So for me, I always tell the children that I work with, I'm a coach as well, your academics come first. I'm okay if you miss one of my coaching sessions, if you need to study for a test, because I think, again, it's important to have something to fall back on. Because, not everybody's going to have a smooth trajectory through the sport journey. There can be an injury
I was going to say
2 years in.
three letters, ACL.
Oh,
yeah.
Don't put that out there, G.
Yeah, sorry, man, sorry. Not before a World Cup, sorry, man, that was bad.
And then you need to have your backup plan in motion. So, and you need that support structure as well.
Oh,
somebody that can remind you of, hey, but you actually have a lot to offer to society.
It's so funny. I had a snapshot kind of airport chat with Brian about it the other day, and he is thriving. He's doing so well within his company, and he was talking about some of the transferable skills, but he's still feeling all the same pressures because he's obviously one of those hyper-focused kind of guys. So he still feels like he's sacrificing connection with family because he's pushing so much into his work. So he's still the same person and still thriving because he's got that go forward. But you are so right. It's the support structures around you, who you plug into. Find yourself a mentor. I wish we were talking about chess right now because that opens a whole different kettle of fish. But we are definitely going to stay connected with you, Doc. I absolutely love this. And of course, we are going to be putting this book out there as much as we can because we want you and your child to enjoy this journey through sport and life because they just inform and help each other so much.